The census process is distinctly different from the Huduma Namba process. If you recall, the Huduma Namba process was registering citizens with their biometric information so that we can have identification information on our citizens, a single source of truth. That exercise took place, and it took place, and we ensured that we have now data of our citizens. The census data is very different, because what we're doing is that we're not only getting the identification of citizens, but we're now enumerating a lot more information that we will use for our planning for the next 10 years as a country.
Again, the issue of planning came up, and this went unquestioned in terms of the particular bite that CS Musheru gave last week on Wednesday ahead of the exercise. And it wasn't questioned or wasn't interrogated further because many were asking, we just did Huduma Namba the other day, and why are you putting us through census? Do you think this was enough in terms of clarification coming from the CS?
No, I don't think it was. I think he's right that the Huduma registration is different from the census. And even in fact, the census data, ideally should be kept like NBS and not shared with anybody else. Mm-hmm. At least the documents that they write up etc. So what they'll give out will be reports based on this. My thing is, first, when he says in Huduma they were just doing biometric registration and that's it, I think that's not true. I didn't register for Huduma myself, but lots of guys who did were saying they were asked about things they own. And you remember even Kibicho was saying how they'd be taking down details about the number of sheep you have, etc. So it's not really true that all they did was biometric registration. That said, these are two different databases, and that I agree with you. And I think it would have been much more, much better if he had explained why the census is being done.
He spoke right after, and he said it's for the planning. Right,
but they said the same thing about Huduma. So my thing again is it's this sort of brevity with information, this reluctance by government to actually come out and explain the things it is doing in a way that people will understand the difference between, for example, Huduma Namba and the census.
Right.
The fact that people don't know this difference is really a failure of government, and in the end, and I would say also failure of the media for not asking the questions. But in the end, that is the measure that they should take, is to say, if people don't understand it, that where have we failed? It's not the failure of Kenyans. It is the failure of the people who are meant to explain this who are not doing it.
All right. In your understanding of data and the explanation of Huduma Namba, biometrics, and now the census data, was that explanation good enough, and especially how it was put out to Kenyans?
No, okay. I know they are two different databases, but one thing is after going through that census, that whole process, I realized they have linked it up, because they were asking the question, are you registered if you have a Huduma Namba or not? Then in my head I'm thinking, if I hadn't registered for the Huduma Namba, would I have gotten anywhere else, or will they flag my name? What will happen to the people who do not have a Huduma Namba?
Right.
Those are some of the questions.
By law, they're not allowed to share the census information with other agencies, as in the raw data you give them. By law, they're not allowed to. This is only for statistical purposes, the census. Yes. In fact, they can't give it even if you're there to say, for example, I stole 1, 2, 3 things. By law, they can't take that and give it to DCI. DSA is not allowed to use that to prosecute you.
So further questions as to why the Huduma question was there?
That is now, when you come back to the whole issues which remained unresolved about Huduma, and whether the government is playing some mischief with our data, particularly in sharing it with the people who may want either security agencies or even worse, probably commercial entities. To look at Huduma, there was something a very gray area around the involvement of MasterCard with the collection of that data. We are told that MasterCard is going to be the agency for government payments. So which means that data is going to be shared with MasterCard.
Yes.
And it's not the first time I've heard that the government does not have money to do some of the data collection it wants to do, the digital IDs, the Huduma, the everything else. So it is teaming up with private sector players who will then be in a position to commercialize that data. If they can do that kind of mischief with Huduma, which I think is against the law, whatever the law says, they can still do it with the census. If we don't know, for instance, who supplied those gadgets they're using for collecting the data.
They said
They said
it
from our
was
local
Jomo
university.
Kenyatta and Moi University.
No, Jomo Kenyatta and Moi University maybe have assembled them, but who paid for them?
And why is that important in terms of security of data?
Because my data is my data.
Yes.
I would not want a situation where Vodacom or MasterCard or Visa card or Uchumi supermarkets or anybody else can get access to that data.
And can we add
Or
that
to put me on their marketing
Research,
list or research or whatever.
I mean,
And these things happen. I cannot discount it.
I mean, like right now, we do not have a data protection bill. We do not have a data protection law that protects our data right now in Kenya. We are just there. We're just giving out our data. Huduma Namba, come. Biometrics, here. I've given out all my biometrics. Census, come. Here. I've given out all my information. But we do not have a law that protects any Kenyan citizen. If, for example, that data there's a data breach right now in Kenya, that census data, somebody steals it from wherever, Pakistan, because you know, like right now in Kenya, the government can come and correct us, but I know in Pakistan, that's where our data, that's where our passport data is stored. In some servers somewhere there. If there's a data breach right now in Kenya, we'd all suffer. We've seen email breaches in government offices, like the recent one in Ministry of Foreign Affairs. There was an email breach, and these are sensitive information, people reading emails, exchanges between countries. That is very, very wrong, and that is, I mean, I feel like I am so naked in terms of protection. I'm just there, vulnerable. Anything can happen and no one will protect me. But if we had a data protection law right now in Kenya, then we can safeguard ourselves. Then we can say, okay, we are at least safe. And I know that that bill is still in Parliament. That bill is still being debated. It needs to be amended. But we have all these things coming up, yet the government knows that it needs to protect its citizens first before it comes to collect more data.
Well, the government feels that we are protected in terms of our data. This is what CS Musheru had to say, and you'll get to respond after. And this was last week, 3 days before the exercise started.
I would like to first assure Kenyans that your data and information is safe and secure. We have ensured that we have several security measures that we've put in place to ensure that all the information that we collect is not only stored in a secure place, but we have full redundancy. The equipment that is being used, which are 7-inch tablets, these devices, as you've heard, were assembled locally, and they have our software, which we have developed within the country. And therefore, we are able to ensure that all the data, as it is transmitted, as it is processed, is actually done within our control. And we assure you that we have the full capacity to ensure full security. In order to ensure that the transmission of data is only coming from those devices, we have created a special network. And that network will only be used to send the data to all the data centers. You will not have other devices out there being able to transmit into our servers. So we're very sure that also the quality of the data coming is only coming from our own sources. The mobile devices are protected, as I've mentioned, and you cannot, the enumerators cannot change the software that is already there, and therefore we are fairly certain that the data we get will be the correct data, and that we will be monitoring on a continuous basis everything that is being transmitted, the quality, and ensuring that it is in good order. I also wish to, at this point, mention that we have sufficient data storage to ensure that all the data for all the citizens that is coming through will actually be stored in our multiple data centers. The requirement at the moment is for about 3 terabytes of data, but we have capacity now for over 40 terabytes. So we have more than enough capacity that is required.
Well, I can say when this, and it's not actually live, it's as it's indicated there on the screen, it was what aired on Wednesday, and this went unquestioned. And as he was saying this, I'll let you respond because you're talking about the breaches or breach of such data. Are you convinced?
No, I'm not convinced. That does not help. This is, you're saying you have enough data centers. You're saying the gadgets are well protected. That is not. Somebody can just hack. We have hackers. It can be in a safe data center somewhere, stored somewhere, but somebody can still hack. Then what legal measures will I take as a Kenyan to protect myself?
Yes.
Once there's a hacking that has taken place, what legal measure do I have?
Especially now that you say
Yes.
the bill is still
Yeah.
to get through. Gadara, first your response and then
I've got several things. Well, first, when he says that data is safe, what we should be asking is safe from whom? And I think one of the entities we should really be afraid that has our data is the government itself. So they are talking about protecting it from external people, but what I'm really concerned is internal guys.
The use.
And we've got track records for this government. You know, we had something called IPRS when they were registering us for what they were calling second generation ID cards. That data ended up with people like Safaricom, you know, and that's how they are able to give you loans on M-Pesa, etc. You know, again, nobody told you when you were signing up that this is what is going to happen.
Are we saying that, for instance, someone feels, no, what's the big deal about that?
Well, there is
issue?
a big deal because this is an entity that shows, number one, it's not going to keep your data confidential. It's going to use it. You know, and then secondly, we've seen, especially worrying for me, given that in about 3 years we have an election, you know, that the instrumentalization of data, you know, so that they can target people for particular, whether it's advertising or particular political messaging, you know, has happened. And if you've got this data set that has your ID, identifies you personally, has a list of all your things, of all your interests, you know, blah, blah, what, you know, and stuff.
And
it's
GPS
easy for them,
coordinates.
exactly, it's easy for them to then start targeting you personally for particular messaging, you know, as they did before. And my point is, again, the question I think that's fundamental to all of this is whether we trust the government with our stuff, you know. And for me, I think it is a big worry when they tell you, no, just give it to us, we will craft a data protection law, you know, it's going to come, but trust us with it, you know. I think they can do a good job if they want to of protecting your data. Is not perfect, etc., from external threats, but I think the biggest threat is the internal
from
one,
within.
is from the government itself, is giving government that ability to be able to see you, to target you specifically, you know, through this. And that for me is what's really worrying. I think for the census, if they do not need, they need to anonymize data, the best way to do it is don't collect personal identification data to begin with. Don't ask for my name, don't ask for my ID, you know, don't ask for my passport, you know. Just sit down, ask me, how many guys are you, what do you do, what do you own, etc. But keep that from the very beginning anonymous.
Okay. Macharia, why is it a big deal for us to focus on this issue of data protection for the Shosho in Geshage, who's probably done this exercise? Why should they worry?
I think everybody needs to be concerned because, as I said, data is personal.
Yes.
And if it gets in the wrong hands, it can be misused. even something as simple as being targeted by a supermarket or any other advertisers, it becomes intrusive. We really have to worry about, and now, of course, I mentioned MasterCard and Huduma Namba. That was something I think was done without our consent.
Although I think, if I may, I think on the MasterCard issue, I think there was a bit of confusion there, because MasterCard, as I understand it, was getting was helping set up a system that you pay at Huduma centers, and they called it Huduma Card, unfortunately, which is again the same name that is associated. But these are two different entities that were actually running the services.
But that data being collected is the one which is going to be used by MasterCard.
Not really, and from what I've read,
isn't it under their purview? They have
what you have running Huduma centers and the people doing the registration for your Huduma number are actually two different.
But still, if it is a method of
so I'm just saying,
paying for government services, for instance, as an individual, I don't need to be locked to MasterCard. I can opt
you should be given
options.
You can have an argument there.
It's for me to choose, not for the government to lock me into a financial services that I may not want to subscribe.
Right. Okay.
To. So that is important.
Okay.
The data law.
This business of being targeted by marketers and advertisers, and sometimes you find yourself getting an SMS from some company giving you the latest offers, and you wonder who gave them my number or who gave them my email.
Yes.
Now imagine that on an industrial scale, because the government has shared such data with commercial entities. Then there is security. It may look very good that we saw one source of truth and all that. But in any modern democratic society, there should be Chinese walls between whatever kind of data we are giving, whatever kind of data National Registration Bureau has, which it should not be able to share with the National Intelligence Service, which it should not be able to share with the Kenya Revenue Authority.
But there's no guarantee that this won't happen.
But in this case, it is not, what they're trying is to make data widely available, which is then shareable across different government agencies. And that for me is a risk.
Okay, and what concerns do we have? You've talked about the marketing targeting, and perhaps for some products, but then politically, we know how 2009 played out.
But my concern here is this: this one does not come from the government, but it comes from politicians. Our census has become increasingly politicized. In a place like Nigeria, you can never do a census because it will cause conflict amongst communities, each of which think they're bigger than the other. We are coming to that. Before the census, we saw some politicians. There was Kalonzo Musyoka, there was my friend Moses Kuria, telling people come and register where you were born, or come and register at home. Why? Because they're thinking of the numbers they will have in their constituencies. We saw what happened in Wajir and Mandera in 2009. There was massive over-registration. Populations quadrupled.
And you saw the explanation from some of the leaders there saying they have 4 wives and
no. That was absolute manipulation.
Yes.
Triple, double counting. Obviously directed by the politicians and the chiefs. And
I like that you can ask that in the street.
No. We just saw the explanation. It was out there. It was out there, and we carried it. No, let him finish his point.
They do. They may have 4 wives, but I think the fertility rates are known, and I don't think each wife gets 16 children.
Okay. To counter that, real quick, and then I take a break and we conclude this issue.
When we speak about the risks of government and this extraction of data and why privacy is important, there are a number of them. Well, first, it's simply the government's ability then to target you as a person. So if, for example, you fall out with them and they don't like you, you remember during Moi's time when people would have their loans suddenly recalled. It's how did government know you have a loan? etc. So all this gives them points of pressure where they can apply it to people who they find.
Let me ask on an international outlook on that point.
Right.
If, and this is perhaps ignorance of me, but with the social security number, I'm not saying just because it's in America that it's best practice and should be copied everywhere, that someone can be targeted in America with a social security number, just the same way that you're saying we will be targeted
again,
if you fall out with the government.
Again, it is access not just a social security number, but to everything else.
Yes,
so, you know, it's the access to all your data in one place where government can get its hands on it and what it can use it for. And I think for me, that is what I find scary about, and that's why I said at the very top that the question is whether you trust, this government. That's what it's asking you to do, and I don't think that there is a reason to trust them. I'll just say two other things. When I spoke before about the IPRS and all these data they had collected, now they used it then to allow people like Safaricom who hooked up with CBA to give out M-Shwari loans. In fact, one professor in South Africa called it, said that CBA became the most profitable bank in the world. From simply giving out these small loans that they were able to do through this. Look at how it has brought in so much debt to individuals, And in fact, he described it as the extraction of a national surplus for the benefit of one politically connected family who we know who it is. The second thing is a question of who is watching whom. Government is very good at insisting it's got to watch us. They'll put up security cameras. It's all over the place. In fact, now they want to pass a bill. At least it's in the CCTV policy, where they want to put cameras in all public spaces, so they can watch you throughout.
Not just that. They want access to private cameras.
CCTV thingies as well. Now, you don't get to watch them. We don't hear about putting CCTVs in police stations. We don't hear about let's put them in government offices, so we can watch what government is doing. That's not the discussion they want. They sign every 2 years by law. They declare their wealth on a form that they then keep secret. They don't allow you to see it. So they want that they can access what you have, but you who's supposed to be keeping them on their toes, who's supposed to be holding them accountable, cannot access their data, cannot find out what they're doing. So for me, this is a real illustration of what is fundamentally wrong with how we have constructed our state.
All right.
That the state deals with us as if we exist to do its bidding, rather than it exists to do our bidding.
There's quite some thought there that we have. I don't know if it will start a movement to get us to be watching the government. I'll need to take a break on this point. We'll conclude on the mistakes that we need to avoid from 2009. And as you look forward to the count yourself, that is Gadara and Gaido, whether you're going to do it after the discussion you've given us about the data protection and data safety, and also that issue of the divorce case with Meru Senator, whether it was really necessary to have it on air last week. Stay with us as we conclude.